Good evening. Welcome to this year's Banned Book event. I'm Aja Holmes, co-chair of Committee on Lectures. Before we begin, let me thank our sponsors, the Ames Public Library, the University Library, and the University Bookstore. The bookstore is providing a reception immediately following the panel and also have 50 Shades of Grey series available for sale in the lobby. So you can start reading it tonight. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel of scholars for tonight. Brenda Lohman is a Human Development and Family Studies Associate Professor who researches and teaches in the area of human sexuality. Domita Brothers is an Assistant Professor in English who teaches composition and literary studies. And Lynn Carney is an Ames Public Library Interim Director. Now, our moderator this evening is Veronica Lawson Fowler, an Iowa State alum and a Communications Director for the ACLU of Iowa to help lead our discussion. And they've asked me to include that tonight is my 34 Shades of Aja Holmes birthday party because I am a fan of the book, and tomorrow is my 50 Shades of Grey book discussion for my birthday as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun things, and I realize that this is banned book. I do read banned books, and I absolutely love this book, but when I put on my academic hat, I do see some issues. So please enjoy our discussion tonight. All right, I'll see you guys after.
Anyway, well, thank you. I'm Veronica. I'm the moderator, and I feel a little weird because I'm up here kind of higher than the panelists. I thought I'd be sitting with them, but as one of them informed me, I am the Dom. So I am the Dom for this evening, even though I'm really a vanilla. So that's kind of inside language for any of you that have read the book. Speaking of which, I am really, really curious on, first of all, how many of you have read the book? Show of hands. Oh, wow. Okay, not many book sales tonight then. At least one of the books. And then how many of you have not read the book? Oh, actually quite a few. How many of you have skimmed the book because you found out about a week ago you had to moderate the panel? Okay. And anyway, and then how many of you loved the book? Decent number. How many of you despised the book? Not so many. Okay. All right. Well, you'll probably find out where I fall pretty soon. But we're here to discuss banned books, the First Amendment, and Banned Book Week. And I have been asked to explain a little bit to some of you who might not know what Banned Book Week is. It's an annual event celebrating the freedom to read. It's usually held in the last week of September, and it highlights the value of free and open access to information. It's sponsored by a variety of groups, but the American Library Association typically plays a very prominent role in the sponsorship, and the ALA is a fast and dedicated defender of the First Amendment and the freedom of information. And my background is in journalism, and obviously I work for the American Civil Liberties Union, so I also like to say that the First Amendment is first for a reason. And the Banned Book Week, basically its goal is to highlight books that have been banned or targeted with removal from libraries or schools. So that's what Banned Book Week is. I was asked, actually, as I mentioned, a week ago to sponsor this panel. And for a reason I'm kind of sad about, well, very sad about, Barbara Mack, who is a journalism professor in the Greenway School, was originally supposed to moderate this panel. I've also been asked to give a few comments about Barbara. She was a friend, and I've actually written a few comments because I want to do it with a little eloquence. If you knew Barbara, she was extremely eloquent. I think I kind of owe it to her. And also, I'm a little afraid I'm going to lose it, so I have napkins kind of underneath here. But I wanted to take a moment to recognize and remember Barbara Mack, and she passed away last week, and she was just 59. So it's my sad duty this evening to substitute for Barbara, but if you knew her, you well know that no one can substitute for Barbara. She's quite simply irreplaceable. The stories about her antics, her adventures, and the retelling of her quotes are legend. My personal favorite is when she was in class and a student was falling asleep, she would walk over and spray them with silly string. So the event this evening would be very, very fitting for her to moderate. She's a former Des Moines Register reporter, as I was, and that's how I got to know her, who ended up as that paper's chief legal counsel. She then went on to teach journalism law in the Greenlee School for more than 20 years. Her brilliance, wit, and generosity created a devoted student following. She never missed an opportunity to tell a bawdy joke. But to say that Barbara liked journalism is like saying that Walter Cronkite liked journalism. To say that she liked the law is like saying Thurgood Marshall liked the law. And to say she was quotable is like, yeah, Dorothy Parker was quotable. And to say she liked a bawdy joke is like saying, so did Mae West. So if I could summon one person this evening to truly substitute for Barbara, it might be Molly Evans, if you know her, the legendary Texas journalist. If you didn't know Barbara, think of Molly Evans, except with incredibly gorgeous, long, dark hair and a kick-ass law degree. But even these celebrity comparisons don't do Barbara justice. She was uniquely herself. She was pure life force, and she's deeply missed. So there, I think I took up the whole period with Barbara. But she would have too, so that's okay. Most of you have read the book, but for those of you that haven't, we have a short summary, and I think it's basically what's on the book jacket, I believe. And it will tell you a lot about the tone of the book, but maybe not about the allure of the book. And here it is. When literature student, I'm trying to get my best kind of breathy voice, Anastasia Steele goes to interview young entrepreneur Christian Grey, she encounters a man who is beautiful, brilliant, and intimidating. The unworldly, innocent Anna is startled to realize she wants this man, and despite his enigmatic reserve, she finds she's desperate to get close to him. Unable to resist Anna's quiet beauty, wit, and independent spirit, Grey admits he wants her too, but on his own terms. And that's where the initials, the acronym BDSM, come in, which we'll talk about more. Shocked yet thrilled by Grey's singular erotic tastes, Anna hesitates. For all the trappings of success, his multinational businesses, his vast wealth, his loving family, Grey is a man tormented by demons and consumed by the need to control. When the couple embarks on a daring, passionately physical affair, Anna discovers Christian Grey's secrets and explores her own dark desires. Erotic, amusing, and deeply moving, the 50 Shades trilogy is a tale that will obsess you, possess you, and stay with you forever. And apparently, yeah, it seems to be happening to a lot of people. So we are going to talk a little bit about that tonight. We're going to start out with brief comments by each one of our scholars. And we will start with Lynn Carey, who is with the Ames Public Library. And she will talk a little bit about what their policy is, and it seems to conform pretty much with the American Library Association's policy, which I have a deep respect for. So Lynn.
Okay. I was told I have 5 or 10 minutes to talk with you, and really I can sum it up in 10 words. 120 holds, of course, we will buy it.
You know what? We're going to have to repeat
Oh,
ourselves, I
shoot.
think. That's okay.
Okay.
I think, as they say in the world of entertainment, you have to eat the mic.
Eat the mic.
Like, eat the mic.
Sounds like something from the book.
His name was Christian.
Okay, I may as well just start blushing now because I think I'll blush all night long. Okay, so I said that I have 5 or 10 minutes to talk with you, and really I can sum up my comments in 10 words. 120 holds, of course we'll buy it. We will buy it, that's 10. We base our purchase decisions on a variety of things, one being public interest. When we initially are faced with how to expend our budget, we divide things up among formats, and we use a variety of vendor tools that are provided to us to choose items. We read reviews, and we make our selections. In this case, we read reviews and decided not to get this book, the first book. And within a couple weeks after it was published, we were faced with several requests, and so we bought it because people wanted to read it. For the first several months that it was on hold at the library, there were 120 holds consistently, even though the 27 copies that we have were being checked out and returned and checked out and returned. So obviously there's an interest in the community. We respond to our taxpayers and users. And currently we have 27 copies, as I said. There are still, 14 holds on the first book, and the second two books we have, I think, 15 or 16 copies with about 30 holds on those. The e-book, we are in a consortium, and we share with a lot of other libraries, and then we buy our own copies too to bolster that. There are 16 ebooks available with 518 holds on them. So why would we say no to purchasing this book? We do have policies that guide our purchases, and we base those policies on recommendations from the American Library Association. We look to the American Library Association for guidance, and we stand very firm on intellectual freedom issues. So the kinds of things that we are looking at in terms of challenges or banning, and banning starts with a challenge. That term simply means that somebody questions material that we have purchased or programs or services that we are providing, and then we have a format that we work with. We first ask the people if they have, whoever's questioning a material, if they've examined the material, if they've read it, and then we talk with them about why we purchased something and how it is used in the library. If they want to talk further, they can talk to the person who actually made that selection. If they are unhappy at that point, then they are bumped up to the director of the library. If they're unhappy at that point, then they can fill out a concern form and go to the board.
Lynn, question. Has anyone complained about the book?
We've had 0 complaints about this book. We've had a lot of comments about the literary value of the book.
Have they been complaints?
Not formal complaints.
Okay.
No. So if a book is just complained about, it's a challenge. If it it's just a complaint. If it goes all the way to the board, then it's considered a challenge. In the 29 years I've been at Ames Public Library, we've had 3 challenges.
For what books? I'm curious.
For Madonna's book, Sex, which was in the 80s. And incidentally, that book we only got 1 copy. She's a brilliant entrepreneur and produced only 1 million copies of the book for $50 each. And they were spiral-bound, grainy photo. It was not the greatest book. But the protesting group that challenged that book decided to take their protest a little bit farther, and they continued to put holds on the book so that it never got on the shelf. And we owned it for 3 years before it fell apart completely, and we had to dispose of it, and it never was out on the shelf. It was on the whole shelf the whole time. A second challenge was about 10 years ago, I believe, and it was actually a program series that was challenged. And then the last one...
What was the program series?
It was called Palestine Unabridged.
Oh, okay.
And then the last one was a couple years ago, and it was a magazine for teens called Sex, Etc. And it wasn't challenged based on us owning it. It was challenged based on us buying additional copies and making them available for free to teenagers who wanted to take them home without having to interact with a librarian.
Okay. The book has been banned, or requested for banning in libraries in Florida, Georgia, and Wisconsin. And I tried to get the latest update. I think, for example, the Brevard County Library that originally banned it, I think it's back on the shelves. My latest Google search tonight showed that. So I think that's okay. It's back on the shelves. So basically, it's the references to, I'm such a vanilla, BDSM, bondage, dominant, sadomasochism. I'm more a mom than a vanilla, so I might call it BM at some point. But tell me what your policy is, again, since I'm a mom. What is your policy in regards to children? Do they have different rights to check out materials than adults?
No, we are intellectual freedom purists, and we believe that those kinds of decisions are family decisions, and we encourage families to talk about issues and parents to be involved in their children's library lives. And so we do not get involved in content decisions for families.
And what about if, say, we have a family card, which we actually do at the Ames Public Library. Can I put restrictions on what materials I want my child to see? And can my 18-year-old see something different than my 14-year-old?
We do not get involved in that.
Okay,
We-
so
we
I
leave
have
that
to
up family
basically, I
members.
have to be reviewing the materials, which I can do online, and see what's being checked out with the card.
And that is one of the reasons that we offer a family card,
Mhm.
is so that parents can look at the record and see what their children are checking out. But we also offer any child the opportunity to get an individual card.
Okay,
We are not
so they don't want their
restricted.
parents to see. Interesting, okay.
Mhm.
All right, and then one sort of follow-up question on materials that might be considered pornographic. How do you handle, I mean, you talk about, 120 holds. As I was saying before, I don't see any Hustler next to the Better Homes and Gardens at the Ames Public Library.
Well, that
Surely
wouldn't-
you would see a lot of, there would be a lot of,
I was going to say
Requests?
it wouldn't fall that way alphabetically.
that is why. How about horticulture? Horticulture, and then,
No, her
and then
children,
Hustler.
her children volunteer at the library. I'm questioning this, Veronica.
But surely, to some extent, the content plays a role in whether or not you decide to carry it. I don't know, or does it not at all?
Technically, no.
Okay.
And I really hesitate to say this because some of you out there will challenge me on this. We've had no requests for Hustler magazine.
Okay.
We do, of course, have a limited budget,
Mhm.
like every library, and we make choices based on our collections policy. That's one of the recommendations of the ALA, is that you have a clear collections policy. And in terms of pornography or obscenity, it's really up to the courts to determine what is obscene. We don't get involved in content.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So now we will have Brenda. Brenda, I will let you do your own introduction so that you actually do it correctly.
Absolutely, and I don't know if I have to fully eat the mic, because generally I'm told I'm loud, so if the...
what you should do with the mic.
All right, so y'all back in the back can hear me? All right, good, thank you. All right, so I was asked to be on this panel as sort of the sexpert. My research area is in teen sexual debut and risky sexual behavior from the teenage years until emerging adulthood. So for many of you in the room, I might be asking you to fill out a survey someday. So my interest is in what factors predict teenagers' decisions to have sex, and what are factors that predict risky sexual behavior. So it's a bit of a stretch to call me the sex expert in this area, but I did a lot of reading the blogs in the last week and have had a lot of discussions with my friends, families, students, clients over the last few weeks. So I'm going to try and present a comprehensive understanding of the sexuality in this book. And as we heard, there's 120 holds in the Ames Library. If you go to Amazon.com, there's 11,209 critiques of this book. I did not read them all. So these are the words, when I was sitting reading the last week, that pop out, right? When you read this book, when you ask people, what is the one word that comes to your mind? Commitment, damaging, freeing, porn, trust, sex, kinky, love, dirty. So you can see they're all over the gamut, right? That many people have different reactions to the sexuality that is presented in this book. And when I talk about sexuality in my classes, that's the one thing I talk about. We all have very different comfortability levels with talking about sexuality. So I'm going to tell a personal story. So I've read this book with two of my book clubs here in Ames, and I told my mom, who is 71 years old, that I was going to be on this panel tonight. I was home in July, and she has a bridge club that she's been in with 45 years. So she's the youngest in this bridge club. 71 plus. So I'm helping create lunch for all these women My mom has them all sitting at the dining room table, and she says, my daughter's going to be the sexpert on the 50 Shades of Grey panel. And I was like, oh, this is going to go really well. 4 of the 8 70-year-old to 80-year-old women had read the series. So they came from a generation where sex was not talked about, right? In their generation, we wouldn't all be sitting in this room having this conversation. So I think that tells you the importance of being able to speak about our sexuality, but we all have to acknowledge that we have very different comfortability levels with understanding our own sexuality or understanding somebody else's sexual preference and choices. So as we've talked about, and we're going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about the literary content, the repetition, the bad passive verb choice. That's maybe our next speaker. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the content. And so I chose a few quotes from all the blogs I read over the last few weeks to show the difference in the perspectives of what people have felt when they read this book. My first comment to you is, if you haven't read it and you want to read it, read the whole series, okay? Because you'll get a very different story and understanding of the relationship if you start from book 1 and you stop halfway through it because you're appalled or you don't like it or it's not for you, versus if you get all the way to the end of the series. You're going to have a completely different perspective, hopefully, if you understand what happens in each of the 3 books. So my first quote is from Mama Gina. I read it slowly, in the bath, over a few weeks' time. It was pure fun. And it wasn't yucky, tawdry fun either. Like when I read certain kinds of chick lit or the People magazine, it was uplifting, satisfying, like the way a great burger is satisfying if you have not had one in a while. While the author captured so magnificently was this, the great sex, the wild sex, the experimental sex, in a loving, committed union, heals and transforms. Then we go to Penelope. This is not erotica. There was no consensual relationship. There certainly was no sensuality. Christian's control is annoying and borderline abusive, which sets liberation back another 100 years. Then we go to Donna. The most damaging part of 50 Shades of Grey is that God created sex to be a partnership that's fueled by love and self-giving, not pain and humiliation. The final quote goes to, we all sort of get the giggles when we talk about sex. And this is one of the things I talk about in my class. I actually do a couple exercises, I won't put you in them tonight, that sort of get the giggles out, like saying penis and vagina and breasts and testes, so that we all get a little bit more comfortable about talking about sexuality. And I read this quote, and it reminded me, I played basketball in junior high, and it reminded me of riding in the back of the yellow bus. And one of my friends had snuck on her mom's Harlequin romance. I don't even remember the name of the book. But we were all obsessed with reading about kissing the neck and, the sex and her virginity and losing it. And I think that most of us are a little intrigued about sex and want to know more, or we want to keep it completely private to ourselves. So this sort of summed up a lot of the blogs I read. I agree with the junior high reference in describing the obsession with 50 Shades of Grey, because I think on the whole our society is at the junior high level in sexual, sensual desire and development. The women who aren't enjoying it are clearly more advanced on every level. Yawn. Been there, done that, but I think there is a place for it in our society. It's reaching women on the level that they need to be reached. I would insert men there too, on an aside. Yes, it's just a beginning, but for some women, this is huge. I felt the exact same way when I read The Secret. I found it to be so elementary, but was thrilled that it was reaching the masses. I truly believe this book will help women to find their own voice, and once they do, ... So if you haven't read the books, we gave a little glossing overview. It's about a BDSM relationship. Some people will argue that it's not a fully BDSM relationship. There are two protagonists in the series, Anastasia Steele, who becomes the submissive, and Christian Grey, who is the dominant. And so his first introduction to her in this relationship is, it's about gaining your trust. and your respect, so you'll let me exert my will over you. I will gain a great deal of pleasure, joy even, in your submission. The more you submit, the greater my joy. It's a very simple equation. The majority, so now some basic factual myths, and I'm going to hold some stuff off for questions. But the majority of individuals who engage in BDSM do so in a consenting relationship. There's some argument with this book that she does not fully consent herself, but if you read the series, she ends up being the one that really is making the decisions in the relationship. Just in case you don't know your acronyms, because we throw a lot of those around in academia and forget that a lot of people don't know what they are. BDSM, bondage and discipline, domination and submission, or sadism and masochism. You can fall into one of these areas, all of these areas. You might be willing to try this once or twice. You might be willing to live in this relationship 24/7. It is a lifestyle sexual choice. And I have a YouTube clip here that I won't play for the sake of time because it's about 5 or 6 minutes. But if you'd like to, and I know we have some of our human sexuality professors in the audience, they share this clip as well with you when you get there. So one of the things about BDSM is a lot of our research is based on really old information. So you can imagine how hard it is for me to get into a school district and say oral or anal intercourse. You can imagine what it would be like to get questions about BDSM on a sexuality questionnaire. So we know basically nothing for the teen years in this area. It's all adult relationships, and it's based on information from a long time ago. There's a lot of Vogue surveys and a lot of, cosmopolitan surveys out there, but truly based research that has been academically published and established. There is little information that we know about these relationships. But these are just some basic statistics that tells you about BDSM. So this information comes from one of my faculty with me who shared, and if I had clickers to give every one of you, what does this have to do with college students? Because most of you in the room, I think, are probably here, hopefully not just for the extra credit. You're a little interested in the topic and want to learn a little more. So I'm going to ask you if you're willing to stomp your foot to this question, if you are a yes, rather than raise your hand. So the idea is if you stomp really loud for yes and you stomp quiet for no, whatever, right, or loud for no, we'll know the difference, and you don't have to embarrass or talk about. If you're willing to, you can raise your hand, right? So I'm going to ask in the room, we're going to start with yes. I've had a sexual fantasy that would fit with one of the BDSM categories: being tied up, being a dominant partner, being sexually aroused by biting. All those yes, stomp your foot. All right. All of those no? All right. So very few. All right, so this comes from our last spring semester class where we taught Human Sexuality 276 in Human Development and Family Studies. 52%, and this is 300 plus 400 students. 52% of our college students said yes, and 48% said no, right? So now I'm going to go to one more question where you're going to stomp your feet for me. I have participated in a sexual behavior that would fit within one of the BDSM categories: being tied up, using handcuffs, role-playing, being the dominant partner, or being sexually aroused by biting. So if you've participated, give me a stomp with your foot yes. All right? If you have not, give me a stomp with your foot no. All right, so there you can tell that some of you, we probably had a little more majority on the fantasy side, but not quite as many in the actually taking the act and doing it. From our class, then you can see this was surprising. Nearly 69% of the students had participated, right? Based on the first answer, I didn't think this was going to be really high when Amy shared this with me, but it's higher, right? And 31% said no. So there, I'm going to leave my statistics. What? Oh, I got it backwards. Sorry. There we go. Sharing somebody else's academic information. You better read your slide. Yes, yes, and no. Sorry, thank you. So the opposite. So I'll leave that, and I'll pause and hold some of my information back for later.
Thank you. Thank you. One interesting thing that I have read about the book and its readership is actually that it is mainly women 30 and older. And so that's why it has been dubbed mommy porn. So interesting. So next, our next speaker will talk about the literary merits. And you can also just refresh the group's memory, or refresh the group on what you do and your name.
I'm Demita Brothers, and I am in the English department. I'm assistant professor of British literature, and interestingly enough, my field is not human sexuality, but the history of literature and science. So it's a long story how I was drafted to come to do this lecture. I'm not much of an extemporaneous speaker, so I prepared a written, but feel free to stop me at any time if you need to. At various points in time in various places in the U.S., the following books have been banned: Ulysses by James Joyce, Beloved by Toni Morrison, Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, and Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Not only have all of these books been banned, but like 50 Shades, they have all been banned for being sexually explicit or for their breaching of sexual taboos. Toni Morrison's Beloved has faced criticism for violent sexuality and bestiality. Ulysses and Lady Chatterley's Lovers were banned in many countries. Lolita, a psychological exploration of pedophilia, has been banned across whole continents. In that respect, being banned for sexual content, 50 Shades of Grey is in some very fine company indeed. In many respects, I have to admit that this book is keeping far finer company than it deserves. I was asked specifically to address the book as a literary work, which I think is something different. I'm not talking about content or right or wrong or whether or not things should be read or not read. And to assess its artistic value, something which I've trained all of my adult life to do, I received my English degree, ironically enough, at Washington State University, or WSU to fans of 50 Shades. And I can assure you that if there is one thing that WSU's English department is not producing, it is sexual ingenues. The truth is that this is an extremely poorly written piece of literature. And I know that that is not popular amongst the fans. The list of what makes it so is really too long to enumerate here. So I will just add a few key points. The book is written in first-person point of view in the present tense. I realize that the intent behind this choice is to lend a sense of immediacy to the action. However, this choice limits the narrative in really stifling ways. The psychological development and complexity inherent in the situation, a man proposing a submissive sexual relationship involving humiliation and pain, is undeveloped and at times completely lost, because such a point of view excludes retrospective analysis, a projection into future times, or possible consequences. Furthermore, this particular emphasis on the current moment seems to prevent the author from developing much of a sense of surroundings and physical setting and details. The description in the novel is largely missing, and when there at all, it's mundane at best. The point of view character Anastasia Steele, one of those apparently ironic metaphorical names so transparently used by the author, like Christian Grey himself, is a 20-something educated woman. This is important because the fact that she supposedly has a degree in English literature with, like my own, a focus on the great 19th century writers, does not seem to help her articulation. And judging by the extremely simplistic and repetitive vocabulary,
As in, he's hot.
used in both her speech and interior monologue, her fictional professors failed miserably to do their jobs. Her interior monologue is almost exclusively restricted to the phrases, he's so hot, crap, double crap, triple crap, holy crap, shit, holy shit, hell, holy hell, fuck, holy fuck. These phrases are repeated ad infinitum, ad nauseum. In short, the choices in narrative point of view, tense, and vocabulary create a character who spans the emotional gamut from A all the way to B. She has all the depth and complexity of a wading pool and all the appeal of a week-old egg salad sandwich.
Okay, I have to interject. Clever renaming of the main character, Anastasia Steele, Anesthesia Stale. So,
Quite possibly. Yeah. So Shirley, I'm sure you think now these are the ramblings of the crusty, fun-crushing school marm.
Oh, you could be a librarian.
Because what's really exciting in this book is the sex, after all, right? Right? The sex scenes in this book are surely what has resulted in the book being banned. They are numerous and banal in the extreme. When our little literary heroine, in all her newly deflowered, glorious introduction to sex, is searching for an adequate metaphor to describe the intensity of her physical awakening, the best she can produce is 2 orgasms, coming apart like the spin cycle on a washing machine. Wow. I have news for Anastasia Steele. If your man's sexual techniques triggers thoughts of household appliances, he's not that good. So we have a book that is poorly constructed with an unappealing point of view character and even less interesting supporting cast. One cannot begin to discuss the horrendous mixed metaphors, absolute twisting of grammar and syntax, distressingly boring pages of email exchanges, and the tired tropes and cliches of love and romance that are barely propping up a narrative dying under the weight of its author's many bad choices. So, I have to say, it is no work of art. I have seen better and sexier writing and descriptive power in Star Magazine's Beachbody issue, which revolves around circling of cellulite on celebrity asses.
I love that issue.
I do too, I buy it every time.
It's very empowering.
Yet, there is no debating the immense popularity. I checked the Ames Public Library, because I was interested, and they have at least 31 copies in some format of the book. Last check, which was this afternoon, had 16 people waiting in the queue to check it out. This is difficult for me, because my assessment is that it is not worthy of that attention, and in fact, I cannot imagine what transgressions the reading public may have performed to have this foisted upon them. I fight here between my sense of hoping no one ever has to read this book again, and knowing that ultimately, despite the fact that I would have to, like Anastasia Steele, be blindfolded, beaten, and put under contract and a non-disclosure oath to be forced to read the second book. Despite that,
You should read the second book, though.
I have post-traumatic stress disorder from reading the first one. Despite that, the book should remain on the shelves. For in this I hold with John Milton, where in Areopagitica he discusses the destruction of knowledge in general and books in particular, giving rise to the sentiment that knowing evil and being able to discern what is good from what is bad is necessary to the education of all people. He says, "He that can apprehend and consider vice with all her baits and seeming pleasures, and yet abstain, and yet distinguish, and yet prefer that which is truly better, he is the true wayfaring Christian. I cannot praise a fugitive in cloistered virtue, unexercised and unbreathed, that never sallies out to see her adversary." So, I hope if you have read this, you have helped yourself in the cause of discernment, and are much better now. My most fervent hope is that you find one of the truly masterfully written, complex, moving works of art that have been banned and read it, and the American Library Association keeps a list. Better yet, go forth and find quality literature that deserves to be read and isn't, and create a run on libraries demanding they order 30 copies. Let them be lined up in a queue to read some such author. If you find that you, in your reading of 50 Shades of Grey or any of the 50 Shades trilogy, have developed a taste for middle-aged British women authors with initials instead of first names that write on daring topics, may I personally suggest A.S. Byatt. Her Little Black Book of Stories explores the troubled depths of the human psyche And I see that Ames Public Library has one lonely copy. And that's all I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And just to recap, some of the most frequently, one of the most frequently, well, long ago, one of the most frequently banned books was Ulysses. I would love it if the Ames Public Library, and because of sexual passages, I would love it if the Ames Public Library had 120 holds on Ulysses.
Wouldn't that be
What's
great?
going to happen?
We would love it.
Well, I have a question that relates to something you said for Lynn. You guys, you talked about when you first read the reviews of the book, you decided not to purchase it. What was in the reviews that made you decide not to purchase it originally?
It's
Bad.
I said that it was poorly written
Yeah.
and not very interesting.
And how much does that come into play with, because there's tons of romance novels and badly written books on the shelves. How much does that come into play in your decision-making process? I mean, because otherwise you would only have maybe Ulysses on the shelves.
We do, as I mentioned, we have some vendor tools that we use. So we'll get information from book vendors up front about what they think might be popular. This wasn't identified as one of those things
Until,
when it first was out.
And it was originally like e-published. It was kind of a
It was
sneak hit.
e-published, right?
Yes.
Right.
It
But,
also-
but it became popular very quickly.
Very
and
quickly.
That's when
And
we
it
purchased
became quickly on Amazon. It's Amazon's all-time top seller, I think at like a 40 million or so, which means it outstrips Harry Potter, but Harry Potter was also sold differently, in a different way. So that says something about the popularity of the book. And there's lots of kind of romance novels out there. So my last question for the panel, maybe all three of you, before we turn it over to audience questions, is why is this book so immensely popular? Why isn't it just languishing on the shelves with all the other romance novels where a dark, handsome, mysterious stranger sweeps up a naive young woman and bewilders her?
One reason it's popular is because it's been banned.
Because
Because it's been banned.
it's been banned.
And that makes people interested in it.
All right. And Damita, what?
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and also I think we need to understand the kind of marketing machine Vintage Books, who incidentally also publishes the person that I just made a recommendation for, A.S. Byatt, is a marketing powerhouse, and the selection of those covers was very, very specifically done. They were done to be in that tone-on-tone, monochrome kind of tasteful, elegant way, so that it would be appealing toward people rather than seem tawdry. And so I think marketing this in that way makes it kind of more acceptable for your average person on the street to buy.
Then if you had the traditional like bodice ripper
Yeah.
illustration, then
Yeah.
on the front.
Or if you had it marketed the way, actual porn is marketed, if she were on the front spread eagle or something with all her business up.
Well, that's what,
I don't think it would have sold 50 million copies.
One thing that's been said about the book is people are completely comfortable reading it on the bus, on the train, in public places,
On
with
their
kids.
Kindle.
On their Kindle. It's not a book that people are like, oh, this is my BDSM book. So I would be curious, Brenda, how you would attribute the book's popularity.
Sex. Pretty
But
simple.
there's so much sex out there.
There is so much sex out there, but I think that this goes a little beyond, to quote the book, the vanilla that a lot of the Harlequin romances are based on. And so I think that people are just interested in understanding these relationships and maybe pushing themselves a little bit when they think about sex.
It's
Okay.
odd that I didn't really think it went beyond the vanilla much at all.
Yeah.
It was
That's a
not
whole
it,
nother
yeah.
debate. So,
It didn't teach me anything I didn't
Yeah.
know much, except
Yes.
vocabulary.
right. Most people would argue that, yes, it's very mild.
Wow,
So,
imagine that.
Well, and I'm curious, there is an annual Bad Sex Writing Award.
It should
That-
get it.
It should. And I think Tom Wolfe won it very recently. Okay, well, and I wish Aja were up here, the fan of the book. I actually will say, when I bought the book for this panel, I skimmed it to try to prepare a little bit, but I think I'm actually going to go back and reread it because what Aja and I were talking about, and maybe, I don't know, I would like to read it in this, is that it's interesting because even though she's in this BDSM relationship, it's about your conflict, and it's about the way women feel about their role in modern society, about their conflicts with wanting to be submissive and dominant. He's wealthy, women's views about money and gifts and a variety of things, and guilt and not guilt, and wanting to be liberated, and yet in being liberated, you're being submissive. So maybe there's some complexity there that I can tap into, and I agree. The parts I read, I wasn't an English major, but I was a journalism major, which is English is, actually not poor because it's where we can get a job. But
Hey, I have a job.
you do have a job. You were an English major with a job. I found the writing dreadful. Funny. I'm reading the sex scenes and I should be aroused and I'm laughing. So, but to each his own. And whether you think the writing's bad or you think that it's obscene, it's not our rights to choose.
I wished it had been obscene
yeah.
to hold my interest because the writing was that bad. Anybody who reads it as a serious reader is not going to be offended by the sex. They're going to be offended by the horrible writing. And if you're looking for porn, you're going to be offended by the fact that you're reading porn from that sounds like it was written by a 14-year-old girl who the entire length of the novel describes her genitalia as down there. And so it's going to be inherently unsatisfying from that point of view as well. So I find that really kind of interesting.
Well, we have allowed some time for questions. There is a mic in the room, though if you speak loudly enough, I'm happy to repeat your question if I can actually hear it. I would love to hear from one or two people who think that the book should be banned. I would find that very interesting in this audience. So maybe another show of hands. Does anyone think it should be banned or should be limited access? Or maybe I should just ask you to stomp your feet if you're embarrassed. I don't know. No one in the room thinks it should be banned. Does anyone think any books should be banned? And then we could break it down. How about this? How many people think that books should be banned from public libraries? None? How about in school? How about in a high school library? Should books be banned? How about in middle school libraries? Oh, you've got stomping feet. Okay, so we have some middle school libraries. How about elementary school libraries? Okay, all right. So we have a little highly scientific survey going on.
Yes.
All right.
Veronica, I will interject that
Yes.
we do use our judgment in the library in terms of where we put the book.
Where you put the book?
Yes.
You
so
don't put it on. You don't
we
put it with the jigsaw puzzles,
Well,
the wooden
no.
jigsaw puzzles.
We don't classify 50 Shades of Grey in our easy-to-read section.
But it is.
Although it might be. I was
No,
going to say that might be the most accurate designation.
Except you found it really hard to read.
Yeah, I
think.
did.
Well, and I'm curious too, Lynn, as a librarian and a sensitive and aware person, how do you deal with, say, a kid who is checking out a book that you just like, OMG. Maybe that's kind of an Anastasia thing, OMG. But I just remember checking out In Cold Blood when I was a little kid, like 8, 9, because it was Kansas where I grew up, and it was history. And I just remember the librarian saying, you know what that's about, right? It might give you some nightmares, right? And I read it, and the horrible murder of the family didn't faze me. But when the two murderers were out driving around and they hit a dog on purpose, I had to put it down. I didn't know if I could keep reading. So what do you do?
If a child asks for assistance, we will help them find items, but we don't get involved.
Tell me about one thing I really liked on the ALA policy is they talk about how denying young people and children materials and information can be as harmful or more harmful than providing them information that maybe they have difficulty handling. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. For teenagers in our teen space, we actually have an FYI shelf where we purchase items that may be of sensitive topics. and brochures, things like that, that we make available for free, again, so that teenagers don't have to interact with any adults to check out these items that they may be uncomfortable letting anyone know that they're thinking about or asking about. We make sure that they have access to information that they need at the time that they need it.
All right. And then, Ed, could you tell me a little more about book bannings and requests for banned books within Iowa? We like to think of ourselves as a very enlightened state. I actually was talking with the ALA Freedom to Read person about a year ago because the ACLU was looking at doing some banned book activities. And maybe I'm proud of my state, but it seemed to be amazingly few.
Iowa is pretty enlightened, and libraries are very strong here.
Mhm.
We have an Iowa Library Association that has an intellectual freedom committee. I served as the chair of that a few years ago, and the entire year that I was chair, I went to one challenge, and that was in a small town where the solution for the complaint was about the book Doing It, and it was in the juvenile section of the library, and they didn't have a young adult section, and their solution was to create a young adult teen section and move the book to the section where the age group that it was written for would find it. That's pretty typical. Iowa has a strong tradition of upholding intellectual freedom.
And the ALA is, because I'm just curious how some of the other libraries, if they are librarians and they've been brought up by in the ALA and librarian sort of culture, which is very much supportive of the First Amendment, very much supportive of getting information out there. They must feel like, it's a terrible word, I suppose, but almost like turncoats or something like that. I don't know. How does the ALA, I can't say regulate that, but how do they deal with that? Surely they work with libraries to encourage.
They do. They provide guidance documents. They provide training. They will come and meet with libraries. Again, the Iowa Library Association has their own committee that will go out and do training with boards. So there's a lot of information available for librarians. I did go to the Story County Library Association meeting in May, and then again today. In May, I asked about this book, and a couple of the smaller town libraries had purchased it. One had decided not to and was extremely adamant about not buying it, even though they had some requests for holds, and used the term community standards. That is one legitimate way to look at what to purchase and what not. But another one had said, wait a minute, what's this book about? And someone told her, and she said, oh my God, I just bought that for my mother-in-law for Mother's Day. She had a tradition of buying her mother something from the bestseller list.
Yeah, I do appreciate that sometimes, people who are most adamant about banning materials have not actually read
Right.
or seen the
And
materials.
I do think you bring up a good point, though. In Iowa, it's mandated by law that every community provide library service for their municipality, which has resulted in 534 libraries in Iowa. So some of the library workers work at libraries that are open 6 to 8 hours a week, and their second job is at Casey's.
Yeah.
And they have no training. So the Intellectual Freedom Committee does try to get out and meet with the librarians in those communities and provide resources for them.
Okay, well, we have a question. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
So I haven't read the book myself, but I've read numerous articles. There's an article in the New York Times about 50 Shades of Grey, and a few other sources where women over and over again have said that reading this book has revitalized their sex lives. And presumably it's not the first time a lot of people have heard of BDSM, and from the little bit of it that I have been exposed to through Gilbert Gottfried reading 50 Shades of Grey, and from what Professor Brothers said, it's not the brilliant writing that's so persuasive. So I was wondering, what is it about these books that you, the panel, think does that? Revitalize their sex life?
I think that's a really good question. And you were talking about it's the sex, but it's more than the sex. There are a ton of books out there with sex in it. There's a whole genre within romance of kind of BDSM romance. And somehow this book, and I think the marketing argument's a good one, has just quickly just risen. I mean, it's a very mercurial way, and the numbers just indicate that it's something more, even with good marketing, than something else. I don't know.
I think really, yes, it doesn't hold the standards to erotica, Anais Nin. I mean, there's a whole literary group of readings you can read that are
Way better.
excellent prose, that are very sensual, very sexual. But I'm actually going to oppose, since we're actually at a debate about calling our parts down there. I have a 3-year-old at home, and I taught her the word vagina already, and she has used it in her child care room, and they sort of go, whoa, right? So rather than down there, your private parts. And so I think that some of us in this room are really open about talking about it, but for some of the individuals that maybe were raised in very conservative households where you didn't talk about your private parts or sexuality, that those experiences that some people view as naive and, oh my God, it's like the washing machine breaking, that those, that
think it's bad
truly, I mean, for you that's bad porn, but I think for somebody that is exploring their sexuality and hasn't had the opportunity to understand or hasn't had sex at all yet, that she puts it at a base very, okay, I'm going to sound really idiotic because I don't know what I'm doing, and they put it out there in a very plain, simple language that might be poor literary prose, that's not erotica of Anais Nin, but that a lot of people can react to because they were raised in an environment where that was uncomfortable to talk about.
Okay, we have another question, and then we have a question in the audience. Yes.
Well, my biggest problem that I had with the books was the very ridiculous inaccuracies of the BDSM-ness of it. Because like you said, you're not an expert in BDSM type things. And I wouldn't call myself an expert.
I could become one.
I wouldn't call myself an expert, but for my final for AP Psychology, I wrote a 15-page paper on BDSM.
So you know some things.
I do, because most people think like BDSM, it's all physical. It's actually not. It's about 80% mental, 20% physical, because it's all about the trust that you have with someone. And I only read the first book, but it was really hard for me because I am a writer and I thought it was absolutely awful to read. But to me, knowing everything about how the lifestyle works, it almost offended me how inaccurate everything was. Like, to me, it felt like the author went on Wikipedia and was like, BDSM, and then made like a checklist of everything to do, like the weighted ball, medicine ball thingies and all. It was weird to me because it didn't fit what the lifestyle actually was. Like, the biggest thing that stood out to me, and I did only read the first book, the severe lack of aftercare in it. Because after finishing of like a BDSM scene, like once you're done doing the spanking or whatever you're doing, there needs to be aftercare from the dom to the sub. There needs to be like
The
snuggle.
baby oil on the tush didn't count?
Well, there needs to be something afterwards saying like, oh, it's okay. Like,
Okay, we're more verbal.
Read the next 2 books.
That's what I'm wondering because
I know.
It's a little bit in there. I'm not arguing that it is an accurate representation, but a little bit more comes out.
Yeah, but that was my biggest thing, that there wasn't anything of that. It'd be like scene over, next chapter, forget all about it. There was no comfort after it, and that's one of the biggest things about BDSM, the violence of the scene and then the tender careness afterwards. That was my biggest problem with it.
And interesting because he complains about how she doesn't trust him. So
And that's another thing, that's the biggest thing about BDSM, it's having trust for someone, like the subs allowing I'm trusting you to do this for me, and trusting when I say the safe word, you will stop, and the dom trusting that they will let them do everything that they want to do.
Thank you for summarizing
Thank
this
you.
slide
Yeah.
that I put here. Trust, respect,
Sorry.
communication, and safety.
Yeah.
Right? So I would like to acknowledge, if any of you are interested in learning more, we do have a CUFS organization on campus that meets here in the Union.
and what does that stand for? What is the CUPS organization?
It is BDSM, alternative sexuality, lifestyle. If anybody wants to, I pulled their mission statement and know some students who belong. But it is here, accurately enough, on Thursday.
Hi, I'm the advisor for Cuffs.
There we go.
There's an introductory
So thank
meeting
you. Perfect.
next Thursday at exactly this time. You can find it if you Google Cuffs Iowa State. It's
Yep.
really easy.
Right up there. So
Thank you.
thanks.
I had one question in the audience I'd like to take.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry, just a second. Can you guys hear in the back? So I'm sorry. Would you mind? Thank you. Okay. And I'm sorry. Meanwhile, we'll have the man in the green shirt.
All right, I actually wrote mine down. I'm here for a class, so excuse me. I'll be reading. I'll be reading straight from this, but I did write my question down. Considering that in recent past, the content of this book would have been regarded as too sexually explicit for mainstream literature, do you think that the society's growth and tolerance for this kind of sexual openness is a good thing or a reflection of the declining morals in society? And to add to that, what do you think the repercussions of this kind of sexual openness would be? And where would you draw the line about such sexual openness for such aggressive sexual content?
That's probably a question for Brenda. Or
Yeah, it was mainly
sexuality.
directed towards you. Sorry.
That's the
That's okay,
sex
that's
bird. I'm
good.
going to get that one.
Sorry, it was a mouthful.
That's okay. So the other part of that story that I didn't tell with my mom at the Bridge Club table was that she said to everyone, I don't really get why you have to have toys. Her father and I had a great sex life.
Awesome.
Awesome, right? And so as you can tell, I was a little like, that's my mom. She's 71. I don't really need to know about my father's and her sex life, and she didn't know what oral intercourse was until somebody at the Bridge Club table explained to her how to do it. Okay? So I learned a lot in that day. So from a personal reflection, there's that accuracy. I discuss this in intimate relationships. When you disclose, when you share information, I'm a big one on talking about sexuality, especially with your partner. Regardless of your sexual orientation, lifestyle, you have to have open communication with your partner. And I think from a comprehensive sex education, to pull my teen sexuality expertise in, comprehensive sex ed is the only program in our country which includes abstinence as well as reproductive responsibility in it, is the only program to show decreasing teen pregnancy rates. And so for me, talking about sexuality is an open thing. My partner asked me this morning, at what age would you let Mallory read this book, our 3-year-old? And that was a really hard question for me to answer. I'll just personally be honest. I think that it has a lot to do with your morality, where you stand in religion, and where you are emotionally and cognitively maturity-wise. So I can't give you a comprehensive answer to that on what's it going to do with our moral decline? I personally don't think we're in a moral decline, but a lot of people do.
So would you say that this being so mainstream and so popular, it's not a bad thing, but more towards a good thing, towards society being more open and less awkward about sex? Or
I would. We're all here. Look at us, all of us in the room. This room's pretty much full. I don't know how many we sit in here. But just the idea that you're willing to even sit and hear it, I think shows a difference in our expression and ideas about sexuality from 40 years ago.
Imagine if we were doing this 30, 40 years ago. Whew. Yeah. Let's maybe take the next 2 questions, and then we'll wrap the questions up.
Okay, when I was up there, I began to say that mine's more of a testament than a question, but I've had time to add the question now. You mentioned A.S. Byatt, I was saying, and Possession by A.S. Byatt is one of my favorite books, and she is able to create this tension in sexuality, and I don't even think she describes a kiss in that book. I can appreciate that. I've also read the Sleeping Beauty trilogy by Anne Rice, which 4 people are picking up now, and it's on the shelves due to the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey, which I find hilarious because it's a completely big leap from one to the other. I did a rant on Facebook sort of defending this book or defending women about this book because what bothered me is I felt like we were being challenged intellectually for enjoying this book, because I did. I enjoyed 50 Shades of Grey, and I knew all of its faults, but I still really liked it, and I feel like I have the right to, because I've And many women now, at the rates we're graduating, have proven that we are smart and capable and independent. And would we be questioned as men about our independence and about our intelligence for enjoying something like this or for something similar? I know men have been challenged for Hustler and things like that, but I think it's unique to women, the questions that are being raised about this book.
Yeah, and I agree that this generates, I think, a lot of different responses from people than the type of responses you get when you're talking about male viewing of erotic material. Generally, I think that there's an association that happens with women that somehow women who read erotica are less than. And that's not my sense at all. I mean, my assumption is that readers would be male or female. I guess I knew that women mostly read it, but when I think of readers in my mind, I think of both groups of readers, male and female, largely because I'm a professor and I teach large quantities of both people. So I think that is a danger that comes about, particularly when we begin talking about women in erotica. That women are going to be held to somehow a different standard, that enjoying erotica somehow makes them less than, less intelligent, less good, less moral. And for me, that's definitely not the case. And also, I think it's fine, and I'll just come out and say, I think it's fine to enjoy junk. You know, I enjoy a lot of junk. I know about the Star Magazine Beachbody issue because I purchase it. Okay. I eat Doritos probably as much as, or maybe even more often than broccoli. It's not that one should never read lower-browed things. It's not that one should not anticipate reading them. It's not that one should not enjoy them. But what I really hope for people is that if they find that they enjoy reading erotic material, whether it be subtle or whether it be blatant, because there are many, many different types of erotic stories, that they go forth then and use the knowledge to seek out well-written erotic material. Because I think that can be something that happens from, this kind of exposure.
Okay. I think we better get our last question in.
Hi. I guess when I read the series, I read it all the way through, and you do see a little bit more development in the last two books. But something that my friends and I were discussing was, isn't this basically the same story everywhere, in every romance novel, except there's BDSM in it? A girl loses her virginity, and then she's with the same man for the rest of her life. Isn't this going back to the same 1950s ideals of you're with someone, you marry them, you have a family, you just go we're basically going back, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just thought that's what I saw in the book, and I was wondering if you had any reactions to that.
Maybe that's why 70-year-old women feel okay reading it on the bus.
Well,
I don't know.
I think it's full of very, very old tropes. She's a virgin, he's experienced. She doesn't have any money, he's a billionaire, It's like the old tropes done to the extreme. He needs to take care of her, and he literally says to her over and over, don't you worry about that. Don't think about that, honey. I'll think about that. You don't need to think. There's no thinking, which I think is far more objectifying than just, wanting to use a riding crop on her, to drain somebody of the thought process, to empty her of mind. And so in many ways, I think you're absolutely right. It's a nostalgic romance for what we wish kind of in the background, maybe the dark thing that I think about this is that maybe women somewhere in the back of their mind want to go a little bit backwards and be in the place where they weren't having to be independent and they weren't in control and somebody was taking care of them and they could trust that man was going to handle it for them. And in fact, I think that is one of the more dangerous sociocultural aspects that we're dealing with, much more so than whether or not he likes to wear a fur-lined glove when he touches her.
Well, thank you. I think we should give our panelists a round of applause.